Welcome back to another exciting episode of Infosec Sidekick. I'm your host, Travis Romero, and today we have a very special guest. Joining me is Shahar Vaknin, the threat hunting team lead at Hunter's Team Axon. Shahar brings a wealth of knowledge and experience in the field of cybersecurity, and he's here to take us on a journey into the fascinating world of threat hunting. We'll be delving into his background and his career, but we'll also be gaining insights into the essentials of threat hunting for both beginners and seasoned professionals alike. But that's not all. We'll also explore the art of leading a successful threat hunting team. Threat hunting is a term that's gained significant traction in the industry. It's not just about reacting to cyber threats, but rather actively seeking them out and neutralizing them before they can wreak havoc. Shahar is the perfect guide to help us navigate this vital aspect of a modern cybersecurity program. So sit back and join us as we dive deep into the world of threat hunting and the leadership skills required to lead a team of threat hunters. We'll uncover the tools, strategies, and insights that Shahar has amassed throughout his impressive career so far. Without further ado, here is Shahar Vaknin. All right, everyone. Hello. I am here with Shahar Vaknin. Shahar is a senior threat hunting specialist, and we had the opportunity of meeting, I guess it'd be like 2 years ago now, through a vendor, which I believe you still work for, which you're welcome to name as soon as I turn it over here for you, your introductions. But Shahar, I really appreciate you joining to talk shop about threat hunting and your experiences in that realm. Would you like to give yourself an introduction?
Sure, I'll be happy. Thanks, Travis. So, as I mentioned, right now I'm leading the threat hunting team for Hunters, so-called Team Axon. That's the threat hunting team, and we are providing threat hunting and incident investigation services to Hunters customers on top of the Hunters platform that's developed by Hunters. Um, and I've been doing it for the past 3 years in Hunters. I joined as a threat hunter, and after a year, I was promoted to be a team leader. Um, Before that, I started like my cybersecurity career in the army, in the Israeli military. Um, I did several roles. I wouldn't talk about it much, but most of my experience is from there. And then after that, I came to Hunters, and yeah, that's mostly it.
Very cool. I don't know how much you can answer about this, but me just being, someone from the United States and presuming that a lot of the listeners listening to this could also be from the United States, um, we do, especially in the cybersecurity industry, notice a lot of folks from Israel like yourself kind of having that army background and then transitioning into cyber threat intelligence or threat hunting. Is there anything you could say to kind of like illuminate, I don't know, like why that is? That might be a really weird open question, but is there like a special emphasis that is a little bit different that you've noticed in Israel that might be, just a contrast to the way other countries have, been doing this?
So in Israel, basically every 18 boy or girl need to join to the army and serve for at least 3 or 2 years. Now in the army, there's several units which are responsible for the cybersecurity. I'll say the biggest of them is A200, which is, I'd say, like equivalent to the USNSA. Um, So it's like the SIGINT unit of the IDF, and I think that's the biggest unit in the Israeli army overall. But yeah, that's also the unit which works on cybersecurity topics. So yeah, most of the Israeli alumni are from this unit or other units. Yeah, I'm alumni of this unit. So yeah, I think that's why you see so many Israeli folks in the cybersecurity industry.
Yeah, and maybe it's just that, you know, my lens is hyper focused on that, obviously, because as a cybersecurity person, I get to interface with, companions in the space in Israel, and that's just a really good pipeline. This is totally not the topic we planned on discussing. My last comment here will be, I can imagine that's like an extremely high quality funnel for uh, building up skill sets and professionals in the cybersecurity space, especially with like that mandatory service. So if you're placed in that unit, you have what could essentially amount to like, you know, free college education and very specialized education into the cybersecurity world, enabling that transition. So,
Yeah,
you know, very critical part of your career development, I would imagine.
yeah, that's pretty good landing into this industry. I did like a very intense, I'd say around 6 or 8 months of course. Um, so yeah, that's pretty good way to get into the cybersecurity field.
I want to ask you so many questions about this, but I feel like I can't keep digging. So maybe we'll have to save that for another time. Um, so your first role out of service was with hunters, and you mentioned you you started as a member of Team Axon, doing threat hunting. Can you talk a little bit about what threat hunting looked like for you in that role, kind of starting out, and what it kind of grew to be?
Sure, sure. So back when I joined Hunters, we were much smaller than where we are right now. It was 3 years ago, and I'll say that the threat hunting part wasn't very structured. Um, um, if I can, I'll say a few words about how we are operating and how we are like doing the threat hunting stuff for our customers. So, a few words about the platform. So, Hunters is a SOC platform, um, which basically we at Hunters want to centralize all of the different data sources of our customers into a unified data lake, and on top of it, provide like detection, investigation, correlation capabilities to allow the analysts to work on our platform in order to investigate incidents within their organization. Now, um, the fact that the entire data is centralized and being stored in the same database allows us, besides of like running our automatic analytics and investigation and all of this other cool stuff, is to be able to manually hunt over this data, such as any other threat hunter in the industry. But we can do it in very wide scale because we have a very wide visibility into attack surfaces of many organizations. So back when I joined Hunters, we had like we already had customers, but much less than now, and it was very, I'd say, um, it was very opportunistic. The threat hunting stuff, we were like thinking on hypotheses, um, like analyzing the threat landscape, seeing some trends, what attackers do in their day to day, and then start running queries over the database and try to find some interesting artifacts which may indicate for attacks. And once we found something that looks suspicious, we've been digging into it and um, finding whether it was an attack or some policy violation or stuff like that. Now, throughout the years, we've started to, I'll say, structure it in a way that will, I assume we'll dig much into it soon, but we understand that our time is very um, is worth like a lot for the company, and we cannot just like go and start hunting for a hypothesis that we've thinking about like a day or two before, and we need much structured way and framework to prioritize and understand what areas and attack surfaces we want to tackle in order to find these attackers that bypass the traditional security tools, right? Because if there's something that was already detected by the security tools, so why do we need us for doing the manual stuff and hunt um, over these logs? So you want to be able to catch those a bit more advanced stuff, um, and for that you need a very like structured and wide framework to allow you to prioritize and understand what you want to tackle and what you want to dive into.
Yeah. Wow, there's so many different directions we could take this. I do want to get a little bit basic here and ask you to define threat hunting, because you kind of touched on it, right? It was the finding the more advanced threats. It was, the comment of we have a detection for this and a detection for that, and it was kind of implying, I think that you're looking for the things that maybe aren't tripping those detections. What does threat hunting mean to you? Like, how should people um, look at defining threat hunting for their organizations?
So as I see it, is taking like a very wide understanding of the cybersecurity and experience in order to manually, I'll say, craft hypotheses that may detect attackers, um, and then try to manually hunt for these a bit more advanced threats that we know from our understanding and experience that usually security tools having hard time to detect those. Um, Maybe because it will be too noisy, or maybe because these are very like stealthy ways to do stuff from attackers perspective. Um, but as I see it, like providing this manual and human controlled layer will allow us to detect these type of attacks. And I think one of the most important things when like running what we call threat hunting campaigns is at the end of it, make sure it's all automated. So even if I spend like a month investigating, I don't know, web shells, and I didn't find anything because my organization is very very good. I have very good defenses, and that's not like I, I'll say that's not a bad thing that I didn't find nothing, and it doesn't show like there is no value for the hunt, right? But in order to take all this effort and make it very valuable is by automating it into my security tools. So it will be running all the time, and if in a month or two from now I'll have the same attack, it will be detected by my automatic measures.
Yeah.
It was like pretty long answer, but
No, it's good.
I
And
hope.
I think you hit on another really important thing that I think is worth highlighting, which is the work that may be viewed as being done in vain, right? Um, Working for a vendor, doing threat hunting or anything, obviously, I think has a more tangible feel to it, in that you're impacting some kind of baseline, a customer satisfaction, something in that realm, which of course you need to wrestle with to show that you're providing value. But I'd like to tie that also back into anyone who's working at an organization, where you might also be having this same challenge where you're fighting for increased budgets, or justifying a position or someone who's specifically there to do threat hunting, and they could, in theory, work 40, 60, 80 hours a week maybe, and do that for an entire month, and at the end of the day their report's going to say we didn't find anything. um, so I think that's a really good point. It's something we can explore a little bit more. But I also wanted to maybe ask, in that same kind of spirit, what are like the the basic points in time of a threat hunt, right? So if you had to kind of define, like, there's an incident response process, right? Like
Mhm.
there's preparation, analysis, containment, eradication. What are those points in time or key stages to you of a threat hunt?
So that's very good questions, and I see it's from what I see, like on the internet and stuff like that. There is no like a very wide like known definition in similar to incident response, where we know the cyber kill chain and stuff like that. So as I see it, it always starts with the exploration and prioritization part, which is maybe the most important part in the entire process. Um, because as I said at the beginning, it's like our our time is very valuable, and threat hunting a specific hypothesis can take a lot of time, right? Weeks, months, etc. So we want to be able to invest this time in areas that we know that are relevant for our organization, that are relevant for the current trends and the cyber attack industry. Um, so I'll say that the first part would be the exploration, understanding what I want to dive into, and this can be done by based on very different techniques and analysis, and that's a whole nother topic we can dive into. The second phase would be the hypothesis. I'd say before that we have like the threat research. Let's say that I've read on the last Red Canary threat detection report that the most used technique was mshta.exe, like executing payloads using .hta files. Um, Now, what I want to do after I understood, okay, that's the topic I want to dive into, is to do what we call inside the team the threat research part. I want to understand how it can be done by attackers. What are the requirements that the attacker need in order to execute such payloads? What are the artifacts that are being stored on the file system after such payload is being executed? How does it look on the log sources, on the Windows event logs, on the EDR logs, and so on and so on? I want to be like a specialist of this kind of technique. So that's the threat research. Now, after I understand thoroughly how this technique works, what the attackers need to do, how does it look in the relevant log sources, I want to craft hypothesis. How do I gonna detect it? Now, once I develop hypothesis, I translate it into query language. We use like SQL, but it can be any other language. And then I start like diving into the data, seeing what results do I get. Most of the time, at the beginning, I'll find many false positives, right? There are always like applications where you found like the next APT group, but that's like a normal application doing some fishy stuff. So then you go back to the hypothesis. You think, oh, maybe I can look on this artifact or this log source in order to clear this noise, and then you fine tune your query, and then doing it over and over until you see the results of your query, um, and you are in a place that you are most confident that you have a query that fits for detection. Now, of course, if you find true positive case, and that's like a whole other topic on when I find some suspicious event, how can I know whether it's malicious or not? But let's say that once I figured something like that, I can further investigate, and then if I find an attacker, then great. That's like easy value for my for my boss, I'll say. Um, but after I found and investigated all the true positive and suspicious stuff, I want to take all this knowledge and threat hunting expertise that I acquired and like pack it up to a detection, right? Because if in another week um, um, a threat actor would infiltrate my network and use the same technique that I hunted a week ago, if I wouldn't have a detection, then I just wasted a month or more than that in hunting for an attack that occurred 1 week later, right? So I think the last part would be the detection engineering. Now, in larger organizations, you'll have a role for each of these parts, like threat intelligence analysts, threat hunters, detection engineers. In the smaller organizations, it will be the same person doing the whole process. But yeah, generally that's how I see like the threat hunting cycle.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's great. A great answer, great insights there. Pretty universally accepted, I think. You know, you mentioned there's maybe not something that's as concrete as like the incident response process, but I will say that hypothesis development certainly seems to be maybe one of the most universal like truths to threat hunting, right? Is the idea of, you know, maybe we could throw the word threat modeling in there as well, as part of like the the prior part to hypothesis development, right? Of trying to figure out what it is that could be a threat in your environment. You know, you talked about doing the threat research before the hypothesis development. I think, you know, taking things like your threat intelligence feeds, just the news that you're consuming on a daily basis, the most, you know, major current events that are coming down the pipeline, putting them all into a funnel and trying to decide how many resources do I have available to me at this time, which will then dictate, you know, the level of uh, or how wide maybe I can cast my net into the threat research to pick a topic to do threat hunting on, and you know, doing some kind of threat modeling around, you know, is this relevant to my industry? Do I even have this tool in my environment? Those are a lot of questions that I might ask in that initial phase. Did you have anything you wanted to kind of expand upon or add to that threat research and hypothesis development portion of the conversation?
Um, sure. So um, by threat research, you mean like picking the threat that I wanna investigate, or how can I dive into the threat that I already decided to investigate?
You know, that's a great question. I think the more interesting thing might be the once you pick a
Yeah,
threat. So let's stick with that one for now.
sure. So how we work is that we have a lab environment, and we are like very techy people. We like to get our hands on keyboard and simulate the kinds of attack that we want to investigate, and then see with our own eyes, I'll say, how it looks like from attacker perspective. What does he need to do in order to um, perform this specific technique? Um, so, for example, let's take the um, malware which was distributed by OneNote, right? We've seen it a lot. like 6 months ago, and it even keeps getting the buzz until now. So once we modeled it, we started like monitoring the different processes in the system once the malware is being dropped to the disk and being executed. And by simulating it, we noticed that the the, um, the embedded file within a notebook was always placed in the same folder. Now, by understanding this behavior, which was um, recurrent and the normal behavior of OneNote, because that's how he works. Once there is an embedded file, he will throw it into a specific directory. Um, but what was the interesting part is that usually it wouldn't be an executable or DLL or .hta files. Now, once we monitor after the payloads which are being stored in this specific directory, we were able to detect this technique from, I'll say, from perspective without like analyzing the execution chain of OneNote, which was like the very um, wide and common way to detect this kind of attack, which is great. But here we have another one. So I'll say that's the first one. Simulate the attack. Now, once we finish with this part, we go to the blue team side, and then we start analyzing the logs. How will it look like when actual attacker will execute this attack on our vendor or on our organization, or one of our customers? And once we identify this behavior, we are moving to the hypothesis place. And another topic I didn't mention is the organizational knowledge or the organizational context, right? I want to understand what areas in my network or what specific devices in my network are the crown jewels, and how they act, and what would look anomalous on their perspective in order to detect these attacks, because they would have the most severe impact on my organization. Right?
Yeah, two really good things that I pulled from that specifically. The whole thing was great, but um, was the actual uh, the truth that you spoke was that you actually execute and simulate these threats, right? Which may or may not be something that every organization can actually do, but it is a step that you take, and it's an important one for you because it allows you to look at the threat as a complete picture. And I wanted to highlight that specifically because I think it's really easy for, and this is probably not just within a threat hunting context, but within an overall cybersecurity context, it's very easy for us to, be very busy. So we're trying to consume as much information as we can. An article will come across, a piece of threat intelligence will come across. Let's take the OneNote thing for continue with that example, and we see this article. It kind of says malware is being delivered via this OneNote attack path, and it's very easy for your mind to lock into OneNote, 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 OneNote. And so when you're potentially launching some kind of threat hunt, whether it's a full-fledged thing or if it's threat hunt light version, you're still, your mind hasn't expanded beyond that. You're so locked into this OneNote concept that you start only looking for like OneNote, right? Or like you're really focused OneNote.exe, or how does OneNote work? How can I detect OneNote in my environment? Or you start making those maybe getting sucked into that mindset. But by simulating the attack, you can start to understand what are the things that are occurring before and after, let's just say, the quote unquote really obvious delivery of the payload, or the obvious, what maybe we'll call like the climax of of an attack, right? Of a specific attack. And then you start to realize, like, oh, there's some really interesting, weird things that happen before a one note, malware delivery is executed. Maybe there's some domains you're looking for. Maybe there's, a weird, um, parent process that launches one node, or, in the case of after, once something's dropped, there's a specific registry that's messed with, or,
Yeah,
something along those lines. And that's where you really start to get higher fidelity, threat hunting, hypothesis development opportunities, and ultimately, potentially, the main goal, higher fidelity detection engineering opportunities.
exactly. Yeah, yeah,
So, yeah, I think what you were talking about is a great way to visualize that. One thing I will also note, you know, as someone who has worked in environments that doesn't necessarily have the bandwidth to really do a ton of threat simulation, and if anyone's listening and they're in that boat, do you have any advice for how you can kind of supplement that?
So yeah, one of the things that I was going to say on the first note is that usually, and I see it happens to a lot of threat hunters. We like always run to start simulating and start doing the attack by ourselves and gathering all the data and the artifacts. But in most cases, there's a lot of knowledge and many resources online. Uh, if it's very popular, then most probably someone was already researching it, and most probably you will find very cool articles um, that will have a lot of the details that you need. So I'll say that when I joined the Hunters, we didn't have lab environment. So one of the main sources of knowledge that we had is these articles and what you mentioned, these online sources. Um, I have like I have a lot of sources that I tend to look at. A lot of Twitter accounts that I usually follow in order to be always on top of these kind of things. But there's a lot of resources and a lot of technical information online. And in many cases, you won't need to simulate the attack in order to understand how exactly it operates and what artifacts it leaves on your computer, because it's all out there.
Yeah. So to summarize, threat hunting, threat intelligence, threat research is definitely one place where stealing other people's homework is not frowned upon. It's actually encouraged.
Yeah. I always push my people to read more and more, other than like go and straight do it by yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Not to do self promotion here, but I had a really good conversation with Jerry Bell, the owner of Infosec.exchange on Mastodon, that was just released yesterday or today, actually. And we talk a lot about information sharing. So if people are interested in hearing more about that, I would encourage them to listen. Obviously that's not our focus here, but there is such a connection, right, between that threat intelligence, the information sharing between professionals, and how threat hunting ultimately begins and continues. Um, all right, let's continue down this path of the threat intelligence framework that we're slowly developing here, that will eventually become the industry standard. So I think hypothesis development is pretty self-explanatory. We touched on it a bit, so I don't know if we need to get too in detail there. Um, you mentioned the next thing after that is kind of building your query, doing a bunch of, well, there's the query, there's getting the results, there's doing the triage on that. We could kind of leave it there. There's obviously a ton of work. Would you say that is the kind of majority of what threat hunting is?
Yeah. I'll say it. Um, it takes most of the time. in the entire process most of the times. Um, but I see it as very like, maybe I'll separate it into two parts. The first one is, we call it in the team and in hunters, the investigation flow. Um, right? If I had a detection that fired this specific lead, which means the attacker did operated this technique, how would I investigate? What are the questions that I'll ask myself in order to understand whether it's malicious or not? Now, this part is only like methodological. We don't write SQLs, we don't write scripts. I really love using diagrams in order to write the questions, and then like tree diagrams. If I see the binary was written like um, 5 seconds before the MSHDA was executed, then it's probably more malicious. Then I have a slight more confidence that it's an attack. And then I'll take a look on the child processes of the MSHDA.exe. If I see that MSHDA executed CMD or PowerShell, then it would make me a bit more confident that this is an attack. Now, we are drawing these kind of diagrams or mind maps, and after we are, I say, crafting these investigation flows, which of course change all of the time, because once you tackle real data and raw data, it looks different every time. Then we translate it into SQL, and then it gets very like technical process. Okay, I found this specific signal, which may be suspicious. Now I'm start asking my questions. Okay, now let's see the network connections that were initiated by this process. Now, according to my questions, would I expect to see this connection to this domain? Now I'll go and check this domain against my threat intel sources. Have I seen this domain flagged as IFC? Yes or no? So that's kind of a general flow that we are working with in order to clean this kind of noise. Of course, we will always have the phases where, okay, we had like an hypothesis, we ran it against our data, we found 2,000 results. So then it's not very consumable by a human. So you need to go back to your hypothesis and make it more tight, and maybe add more filters. But once you are getting a reasonable number, you can start in actually investigating these leads and asking these follow-up questions in order to understand, okay, how can I develop this investigation flow to understand whether or not I'm seeing a real attack or legitimate activity.
Yeah. So it sounds to me like there is a real blending of technical and non-technical between the hypothesis development and the query development phase. And I really like that you added that mind map kind of visualization for people who are listening or watching, because um, it's really insightful, right? And it goes back to that potentially like the one-dimensional aspect of threat hunting that people might be tempted to pursue, where you're looking at a threat intelligence article, you have a one-dimensional view of what you're thinking you're going to look for, you develop a one-dimensional hypothesis, you develop a one-dimensional query, you end up with 100,000 results, and it's unhelpful. But I really like where you're starting to like add to your hypothesis in a technical concepts, but not, you're just thinking about it at this point. You're starting to say, well, what, does time frame play a role in the attack? Does, you know, a specific parent process play a role in any way, like a good way or a bad way? Um, and you're starting to then take those conversations and thoughts and actually implement them in a technical manner to make your query better over time. I think that is an extremely important part. and of the threat hunting process. And I don't know if it matters if you get that 100% correct every single time, but I would certainly say it matters to try it every time you start a threat hunt.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll say that sentence that I really believe in is that the main thing is threat hunting is asking the right questions rather than providing being able to provide the right answers. Because once you develop these questions, answering them is pretty like technical process. Okay, so how can I know what are the network connections? I'll go and develop a query. Now even ChatGPT can do it, right? But the whole point is to ask the right questions that would define in a very very good way and would differ between the false positives and the true incidents.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know why I'm thinking, but like, yeah, 1 plus 1 has a very obvious answer of 2, but you kind of have to know why you're asking. Like, you have to develop like what is the 1 plus 1, and that's really where the key is. Um, no, that's really good. Let's pivot real quick to the end of this process, I think, because I do want to hit one other thing. I want to be respectful of your time. Um, what does it look like when you finish a threat hunt? So you had mentioned detection creation kind of for longevity's sake, right? It's almost like a little piece of the threat hunt you can leave behind to posterity and say, hey, we actually did something. Um, but can you talk to me about, what the end of a threat hunt looks like? And um, yeah.
Sure, sure. So I'll talk I'll talk about it a bit from vendor perspective as a service provider. And as we talked before, like finding attacks is active and really sophisticated attacks is pretty hard, right? That's why cybersecurity is one of the most like profitable industries, and because it's really really hard to detect those very advanced threat actors. And as you all know, you can like hunt and research your environment for the entire month and then finding nothing. But what we wanna get from the all time we invested is not only the attacks and the actual incidents. So as we see it, is that first of all we wanna keep the knowledge, right? So we have like very strict templates that we use in order to keep the knowledge for the next time we will do the same hunt. And of course, in order to um, take it and pass it to our engineers in order to automate this content within the platform. So we don't want any of the knowledge to go away after we concluded the hunt. Now, for what other value we want to provide to our customers is, of course, the knowledge that we gathered during this entire research. So we let's say we focused heavily on ransomware attacks targeting S3 buckets in AWS. Now that's very like I'll say niche attack surface and very new area that right now we're starting to see more and more attackers moving to this kind of space and understanding that the actual sensitive files are not being kept on your physical server anymore. Now everything is on cloud. So attackers are starting moving there also. So while we did our threat hunting on the customers, we gathered a lot of knowledge that we think would be very, very valuable for our customers. So delivering those threat hunting reports and threat research documents that we are sharing with our customers, and also providing newsletters with the data that we see. So even though we haven't found a real incident on a specific customer, he's still getting the knowledge, the detection in the system, visibility. We know that it's very I'll say that it's very hard to find attacks, but that it's very easy to find visibility and configuration gaps. They're everywhere. So if I hunt for, I'll say, as I started, I started with the S3 encryption. So if I hunt for encryptions on S3 buckets, and I know that for operating it, the attacker needs, say, AWS role with this and that for permissions, and they see that the organization are granting these permissions for some weak, I'll say, users and non-admin users, which puts them at risk. So I would always be able to externalize these findings and help him to improve his security posture. So once an attacker would target him, he won't be able to operate this kind of attack. So there are a lot of different aspects you can externalize and provide, whether it's for your customers or your organization, in order to improve your security, even if you don't find these very, very sophisticated and advanced actor, which is a good thing, right? You're not being attacked.
Yeah, yeah, great answer. I'm really obsessed with people placing that emphasis on proving value, and I think it's really special to hear it from a vendor perspective, only because, again, it just, to me, it at least amplifies the direct correlation from like what you're doing to the value you're providing to a customer. I mean, even just from a sales perspective. And the only reason I say that is because I think sometimes people find it difficult to make that same connection as an internal security team to, you know, to a business that just is, it could be anything, right? You're not a cybersecurity company, you're not providing cybersecurity services, but you still are performing cybersecurity related tasks because they're important, and it's still providing that same level of value to the business. So the artifacts you produce from these threat hunts can be shared with IT organizations, with the business, in the same exact way that you're, offering this information to customers. In fact, that's why a lot of internal organizations still refer to the business and other teams as customers, right? Because it reinforces that mindset. So you can still produce a newsletter or, some kind of report after a threat hunt takes place, even if there were no findings. In fact, maybe more importantly, when there's no findings, because, it's kind of like a little, safety blanket when you're going to bed at night. It's like, okay, I know my threat hunting team exists. They did something. They weren't just sitting there, and they were taking care of, looking at this very pertinent threat that I just happened to see, in the news or on the sidebar on my social media as I was scrolling through, and I was kind of worried about that, but now I don't have to be.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So awesome. Well, this has been a really good conversation of, I think, about the threat hunting process that you guys have at Hunters, and what you've been kind of really digging into throughout your time there. Um, I did want to kind of end maybe on some of your experiences transitioning into like leading a threat hunting team. Um, I guess we could take this wherever you really want it to go. But obviously being the leader of a team is something special. It's a little bit extra. You have more that's on your shoulders. What does leading a threat hunting team mean to you? And I don't know, what's your experience been like transitioning into that role?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I'll say that less research and hands-on keyboard stuff. Um, but yeah, generally it's more like thinking in an upper level on, as you mentioned, the value. that we want to see from our threat hunting efforts. So it was really like stepping one step higher from the place where I was actually looking on a lot of attack surfaces, simulating attacks, researching, hunting for incidents and stuff myself. Now I have my amazing team that does so, and what I'm more focused at is on creating these frameworks in order to do something that we actually didn't dig much into, but the prioritization, understanding what matters, and how can I automate the process so I'll have very strict definitions of what should trigger a threat hunt or a response to an incident. So it would be structuring these frameworks, creating those, I'll say, processes that are relevant for threat hunting, how we can do our threat hunting in a more structured way, in more reliable way, that will both provide our customers the value and the knowledge that we want to provide them, and also will aid our engineering team in order to automate all the stuff that we do and the methodologies that we ideate inside the platform. How can the investigation flow that we thought of would be automated inside the platform so our customers will be able to benefit from it automatically. So that's from processes development side, and of course a lot of metrics. We all trying to be very much data driven. We want to do more with less resources, right? So we want to be able to understand where are our bottlenecks. We want to understand how we can improve our tools to save time from our day-to-day processes. So yeah, that's most of the stuff that I'm thinking about.
Yeah, I think that's pretty universal, like getting into a lead role kind of thought that goes into any team. But it's nice to hear it in the specific context of threat hunting. So what are some things you like, qualities or skills that you look for specifically in your threat hunting team members? Is there, and I ask this question because there may be people who are looking to start threat hunting, looking to get a role in this space, but also just like things that people can work on if they're already in this role or they want to pivot. But yeah, in general, like you know, what's in the threat hunter's toolbox, from a skill perspective?
Yeah, so I'll say the first and maybe the most important thing would be being passionate about cybersecurity, because as I see it, as threat hunters, we need always to be on top of things that happens in the cybersecurity landscape. We need to know if there's like a new attack technique that attackers utilize right now, or if there's a new vulnerability which may affect my business or my customers. And if you're not passionate and interested in this world in your day to day, then it wouldn't work. So that's the first thing. The second thing would be, as I mentioned before, like asking the right questions, because I'll say that I don't even expect from the threat hunters to know much SQL or any query language, because that's very technical. That's something that can be developed. But the more harder thing to develop is having this research methodology and threat hunting methodology of asking the right questions and looking on the right spots in order to identify attacks and, of course, investigate them. And of course, that on top of that, it needs. I'll say that the threat hunter needs to have very wide knowledge, a lot of experience in this field, because it also takes something we didn't talk much about. A lot of like intuition. Um, when you're analyzing like massive amounts of data and you are scrolling with your eyes over hundreds of command lines, you'll probably need a good intuition to say, okay, this one is a bit more suspicious. This one feels like I need to dig deeper into it. And this intuition is being developed based on experience and knowledge. So
Wow. That is actually, all of those answers were great, but I wanted to linger on that as a closing here because it threat hunting, like the role itself, you may have almost the most freedom, like compared to a lot of other roles, right? Like um there's no tickets that are coming into your queue per se where it's like do X, produce Y. You're not being tied to, a particular project per se with a particular result uh, that is like super measurable. You're right. There is that like, here's a massive amount of data. What can you see? And that's kind of the question that's asked. And as leaders, like we are going to put the appropriate guardrails in place and, try and standardize that process and eliminate potential for error as much as possible. But at the end of the day, it's really the people that are doing the threat hunt that are going to be the ones that make that in the moment decision about certain things. And so, I mean, maybe one of the most important things you could say is like, this isn't really an entry level role. You do need to kind of build up, and there might be companies that are small enough that, you're going to be doing some of this stuff always anyway. So you're going to be able to build skill sets that are required to be like a dedicated threat hunter over time in roles like that. But um, yeah, there's something about that intangible, like just experience and ability to have that intuition that really is, I think, core to threat hunting. And maybe I'd also maybe like apply that to like probably a few other roles, but threat hunting, I think it's a really good one to bring up there.
yeah,
Um,
I definitely agree. I can say that from personal perspective. When I started to do threat hunting, um, I thought that I everything looks like an attack to me. I said to my boss, "Hey, see, I found another attack, and this was another attack." And then when I start digging into it, I understood, oh, that's just a normal application doing some suspicious stuff. Um, and yeah, this intuition go for both ways, both on understanding, okay, that's something that's more suspicious, and also understanding what's the false positive, right?
yeah, computers do weird stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh man, Shahar. Well, hey man, I really appreciate the time you took out of your evening in Israel to be with me today. I always like to give, a few moments at the end. If you have any closing thoughts or anything you wanted to plug or, just some final words before we close here.
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for having me. It was great conversation, and we dug into topics that I'm really passionate about. And then if we talked about on how to get to such roles and how to be threat hunters, so as I mentioned before, like be very passionate about it. Um, read as much as possible, and ask the right questions.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Shahar, and thanks everyone for listening. Hope you all have a great day.